Noel, I want to talk to you about the BBC because you said last year that you intend on buying the corporation. Let's discuss the handling of Top Gear and Jeremy Clarkson. How did that go for the BBC?
I think it was just yet another example of extraordinarily bad management that wouldn't be tolerated in a private company. I'm thinking Russell Brand and Jonathan Ross, and then we've got what happened with Clarkson. I mean, it is difficult to think of a better way of handling something badly. It was just extraordinary. You've got all the bigwigs saying, no one person is bigger than the BBC. And then they pull the show, denying the viewers the chance to see whatever they'd shot. Then they cobbled it together into a final episode that didn't really work because it didn't have all the lovely little elements that people love. The good news for Top Gear fans, of which I am one, is that apparently we're going to get Chris and we're going to get a great Top Gear, and the other three will emerge somewhere, hopefully doing something not purely about cars, because I think they would be brilliant if their brief was expanded. So we'll sort of get two shows in the place of one, but as a management exercise, it was right up there with running a cruise liner onto a heap of rocks. I mean, I love the BBC, and I don't want to see it collapse and fail. But it is difficult to see with its current strategy how that can be avoided. It only requires 6% of licence payers to stop paying, and the whole lot collapses. This is an organisation with a guaranteed, £4.5 billion income. Well, a lot of private companies would like to have a guaranteed income of that. They spend £120 million collecting the licence fee.
Yes.
So, it's just absolutely insane. There's nearly 1 million licence payers who pay just simply to collect the licence. They don't get anything for it. It's interesting. I sat at the Monaco Grand Prix. I was a guest on Chris's boat briefly to do a Q&A with with the people that have paid a huge amount of money to children in need to go for the weekend. I mean, Chris has raised huge amounts of money doing that. And after the Q&A, he and I sat and had a little chat. And we talked about Top Gear and whatever. And Chris said, no, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. And he said how tired he was. And he did look very tired. And so I was absolutely stunned when within weeks I read, that he'd not only shown interest, that he'd accepted the job. I just hope he's not taking on too much. He is a brilliant talent. He is also a mercurial talent in the true Kenny Everett, Clarkson mould. And he will need to be managed and supported. Otherwise, he could just burn out and make some shocking mistakes. I hope it works out for him. I'm a big fan of his.
Is BBC local radio worth £112 million a year?
No, it isn't. Of course it isn't. And the Gaelic services aren't worth it either. If you want to have Gaelic broadcasting, you can get that online and you can get it done better. It's insane that they spend something like £40, £50 million a year entertaining tens of thousands of people. Yeah. It's insane that they fund the BBC World Service. Do people living in the UK really want to be funding government propaganda? The whole structure of it, so you've gone back to the Beeb again, but the whole structure of it is wrong, which is why last year I revealed that I had a consortium lined up and we are ready to buy the BBC. It requires an Act of Parliament, but we would buy the BBC and save them.
It's interesting, when you came out with that, people laughed at it and thought it was a joke. But it seems like, again, in recent weeks, it is not unthinkable that it could happen, because the BBC as we know it is not going to be around in 5 years. They're going to certainly cut the budget to a point where there can't be these thousands of journalists up and down the country. And there's a good argument that there shouldn't be that many. What would you do then? What would your BBC look like, and how many people would it employ?
Well, just on the first part of that, I was interviewed on Newsnight, and Jeremy Paxman sneered at me when I said I had this consortium and we would buy the BBC. Within weeks, he had left Newsnight, and within weeks, he had attacked the BBC publicly in a number of articles. There's a lot of two-faced people, and I'm not being two-faced about it. I had 30 great years at the BBC. I've made my position clear. I would hate to see the UK lose the BBC, but it has to be pared down and fit for purpose. It's trying to be all things to all people in an age when Apple could crush it tomorrow.
So what would you do then? Back to my original question.
You have to pare it down. You have to accept the fact that the consumer is king, and therefore people can get their local news and information from other sources. You don't need that massive news operation. Gone are the days where the BBC led the world in impartial news. It's struggling to defend itself as being impartial, and clearly from the recent election coverage it's not impartial. Yeah. So when in the world of CNN and Al Jazeera, big global broadcasters, and obviously the power of the internet, BBC News no longer carries the respect it used to. So you've got to cut down the whole of the news side of it. You've got to focus on probably a couple of good TV channels, and you've got to really focus upon original programming. People want good content. They don't want repeats of shows. They don't want padding things out. And you think ITV threw themselves into a multi-channel environment and immediately lost millions, and because they're private, had to close them all down.
Yeah.
Well, the BBC staggers on with channels that at times only hundreds of people patronise.
And there's a good argument that Radio 1 and 2 should be closed, as we heard last week, but they're hugely popular. Would you defend those, or have they got to go too?
Probably you need two very good radio channels, and how you configure them, I don't particularly want to reveal, but do you remember there used to be two? One was called the Light Programme, one was called the Home Service.
Yeah.
Radio 3, forget it. It's too elitist, and it's too irrelevant. Classic FM do a good job, and now I've launched Positively Royal. We play excellent classical music. So, no, that's got to go. I think a BBC where it focuses upon what it used to do best, which was encouraging talent and producing original content on a small number of channels, and clearly an internet presence. They've got to, they can't walk away from the internet, and it's got to be funded in a slightly different way. But it's all going to fall apart if it just staggers on the way it is.
And finally, on the BBC, getting turkeys to vote for Christmas. How do we get rid of managers to get rid of managers?
Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? That's always been a problem. But when I own it with my really good team, it won't be a problem, Alex.
You can sort that out. And very finally, aside from the BBC, although it's related, I did the last interview with Jimmy Savile. At this point, when you look back, is it astonishing, again, A, how the BBC handled it, and the B, that it was kept so quiet for so long?
I don't know. It's a really good question. And there's an assumption that because I was at Radio 1 when Savile was there, and I also hosted Top of the Pops, and I was on BBC television and whatever, that I would know anything about that. And it sort of almost seems a bit naive to say, but I didn't know about it. I mean, I read an interview recently with Anne Nightingale, and Anne was asked that question. She said, you know what, I used to go to the BBC, do my job and go home. And that's what I've always said. It was an incredibly competitive environment. I didn't have friends amongst my colleagues. I was only ever on a 13-week contract at Radio 1. You never knew who was going to get your show or stab you in the back or whatever. So I just tried to be very, very professional. And I was astonished. I just thought, actually, Jimmy Savile wasn't very good. I thought he was weird. When I met him, I thought he was odd. And I thought he was a crap broadcaster.
Very finally, when you watch Saturday night TV now, is it a compliment that we see so many of your brilliant ideas from House Party, which was my favourite TV show of all time, being recreated by the likes of Ant and Dec? There's a backhanded compliment in there somewhere, isn't there?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Ant and Dec. A very big fan of Ant and Dec. I think they're excellent presenters. And they've been very honest. They plundered the House Party archive and created Takeaway. So no, I don't have a problem about that. I take it as a compliment. Yeah. You mentioned 400 radio stations.
Positivelyhappy.com is the place to go. This is the brand new set of radio stations. Really 400 of them. How are we going to find these, and who's going to manage them, and who's going to be on them?
This venture is the biggest thing that I have ever done. And I look around and I think to myself, I wonder why nobody thought of doing it. And the best way to describe it is that 100 years ago, the first magazines appeared dedicated to individual subjects, activities, leisure pursuits, and whatever. And over that century, the magazine shelves gradually got heavier and heavier with all sorts. There was a magazine for everything. Then Sky came along, and they introduced us to the electronic program guide, and we got used to the fact there were multiple channels, and that those channels were actually dedicated to individual subjects. But nobody in radio has ever produced genre-specific radio stations. And that's what I launched last year, very quietly, and is what I've been building. And we have 7 categories. We have radio stations for countries, cities, for interests, for leisure pursuits, for health and well-being, and you can literally build the soundtrack to your lifestyle by dipping in and out of my radio stations. They're all the same in that they have no news, because news is negative and very bad for your health. They have no commercials, and they are totally free. They're all different because each covers a different subject.
Positivelyhappy.com is a place to go and hear just great music. It's really uplifting, and as you say, there's no nonsense in between. You just get on with it. Noel Edmonds' new book is going to be out later in the year, and hopefully we'll see you for a new series next year with Deal or No Deal, and of course the series continues on Channel 4. Thanks so much for your time.
Alex, thank you very much for your time.